The stars had always been cold and empty to Danny, but on that terrible night 30 years ago, they became something worse. They became a graveyard. He stood on the observation deck of the colony ship, watching the swarm descend upon 22B. The parasitic creatures moved like a living cloud, millions of them blocking out the light of the distant sun. Below, on the planet's surface, 12,000 human colonists scrambled for shelter. They had no weapons that could stop this. They had no ships fast enough to escape. They had nothing but hope, and hope was dying fast. Danny was the colony administrator. He was supposed to protect these people. He was supposed to lead them to a new home among the stars. Instead, he was watching them die. "Send the distress signal again," he ordered. His voice was hoarse. He had been giving the same order for 6 hours. "Sir, no one is responding," his communications officer said. The young woman's eyes were red from crying. "The nearest human fleet is 40 light-years away. They cannot reach us in time." Danny closed his eyes. He had known this would be the answer. Earth was too far, the other colonies were too weak. Humanity was still young in this galaxy, still small and fragile. They had no allies, no friends among the stars. They were alone. But he sent the signal anyway. He sent it on every frequency, in every language the translation computers knew. He begged anyone who was listening to help them. And someone answered. The ship that appeared was unlike anything Danny had ever seen. It was elegant and ancient, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like water. It did not look like a warship. It did not carry weapons that Danny could see. But when it moved between the colony and the swarm, something changed. They simply stopped as if frozen in place. Then they began to retreat. Danny watched in disbelief as the swarm pulled back, flowing away from the planet like a dark tide going out. Within an hour they were gone, vanishing into the depths of space. The strange ship sent a message to the colony. The voice that spoke was calm and gentle, like a grandfather speaking to a frightened child. We have heard your call. You are safe now." Danny wept. He was not ashamed of his tears. All around him, people were crying and embracing each other. They had been saved. Against all odds, against all reason, they had been saved. They did more than just drive away They used their influence with the Galactic Council to find the human colonists a new home. They provided ships to transport the survivors. They gave medicine and food and comfort to people who had lost everything. When Danny finally met the elder named, he did not know what to say. The alien was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 years. Danny felt small in his presence, like a child standing before a mountain. "How can we ever repay you?" Danny asked. "We have nothing to offer. We are nobody in this galaxy. Why did you help us?" Studied him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried a weight that Danny felt in his bones. "We helped you because you asked, because you were in pain and we could ease it. That is reason enough." "But surely you want something in return," Danny insisted. "Resources, territory, a promise of service. Name your price." The elder made a gesture that Danny later learned was a smile among his people. "One day, perhaps you will help another in need. That is payment enough." Danny never forgot those words. He carried them with him for the rest of his life. He told the story to his children and he wrote it into the history books that every human child would read. They asked for nothing, and that made the debt even greater. 30 years passed. Humanity grew. The survivors of 22B built new lives on new worlds. Their children became engineers and soldiers and explorers. They reached even further into the stars. The small, fragile species that had nearly died in its first colony became something more. Humanity built a fleet, not as large as the great empires, not as powerful as the ancient races, but strong enough to defend their own. They had learned the hard lesson of the galaxy. Those who could not protect themselves would not survive. Commander Lisa Grant had heard the story of the rescue many times. Her grandmother had been one of the colonists saved that day. Growing up, Lisa had seen the old photographs, heard the old stories. She knew that somewhere out there was a race of gentle scholars who had given humanity a second chance. So when the distress signal came through on her bridge, weak and broken and desperate, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. This is we are under attack. The Dominion has invaded. Our defenses are failing. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. Our world is burning. Lisa played the message 3 times. Each time she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. They had saved her grandmother. They had saved all of humanity's future. And now they were dying. She contacted Admiral Cole immediately. The old man listened to the recording without speaking. When it finished, there was silence on the channel for a long moment. "The Galactic Council has declared neutrality," Lisa said. "No one is coming to help them." "I know," replied. His voice was heavy with something Lisa could not name. Anger, perhaps, or grief, or maybe something older and deeper than both. "Sir, what are your orders?" Was quiet for another long moment. Lisa could almost hear him thinking, weighing the odds, considering the costs. The Dominion was one of the most powerful military empires in the galaxy. Their fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. Humanity had less than 2,000 warships in total. By any reasonable calculation, going to war with the Dominion was suicide. But some debts could not be measured in ships and soldiers. Some debts were written in blood and tears, and the memory of a dark night when all hope had been lost. "We pay our debts," said at last. "All of them. Prepare your ship, Commander. We are going to war." Lisa closed the channel and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, they were fighting for their lives. Somewhere out there, an ancient kindness was waiting to be repaid. She smiled, though there was no joy in it, only determination. "Helm," she said, "set a course for space. Maximum speed." The warship Defiance turned toward the darkness and began to move. The emergency session of the United Earth Council was chaos. Politicians shouted at each other across the great chamber. Some pounded their fists on tables. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the holographic display that showed the Dominion fleet surrounding space. 10,000 warships, maybe more. The display could not count them all. "This is madness," Senator declared, his face red with anger. "We have 1,700 combat-ready vessels. The Dominion has 10 times that number. If we go to war, we will be destroyed." "They have no formal treaty with us," another senator added. "We have no obligation to help them. Our duty is to protect human lives, not to throw them away in a hopeless battle." Admiral Cole stood at the center of the chamber, letting the arguments wash over him. He had expected this. Fear was a reasonable response to the numbers on that display. Any sane person would look at those odds and choose to stay home. But had not become an admiral by being reasonable. "May I speak?" a voice called from the gallery. The chamber fell quiet. A young man was standing in the visitor section, wearing the uniform of a fighter pilot. His name was, and his face was known to everyone in the room. His grandfather had been one of the colonists saved by the 30 years ago, had grown up hearing that story every night before bed. "This is a closed session," Senator said. "Civilians are not permitted to address the council." "Let him speak," said. His voice carried the authority of a man who had commanded fleets in battle. The senator fell silent. Walked down to the chamber floor. He was young, perhaps 25, with the confident stride of someone who had faced death before. He looked around at the gathered politicians, meeting their eyes one by one. "My grandfather was 6 years old when they came," said. "He told me what it was like, the sky turning black, the screaming, his mother holding him in a basement, praying to any god that would listen." The chamber was completely still. "They did not know us," continued. "They had never met a human before. They had nothing to gain by helping us. But when they heard our call, they came anyway. They saved 12,000 lives that day. 12,000 people who went on to have children and people who built colonies and cities and a future among the stars. He paused, looking directly at Senator. I exist because of them. My parents exist because of them. Half the people in this room have ancestors who survived because of their kindness. That was 30 years ago, the senator said weakly. The situation is different now. The situation is exactly the same, replied. Someone is dying and they are asking for help. The only difference is that this time we have the power to answer. He turned to face the full council. If we abandon them now, we are not protecting ourselves. We are telling the galaxy what kind of species we are. We are telling everyone that human gratitude means nothing, that our word means nothing, that we take and never give back. His voice grew harder. But if we fight, even if we lose, we show the galaxy something else. We show them that humans remember their friends. We show them that we are worth knowing, worth trusting, worth saving. Straightened his shoulders. My grandfather lived because someone was willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. Now it is our turn to do the same. That is not madness. That is honor. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decision. Then, slowly, Admiral Cole began to clap. Others joined him. The applause spread through the chamber like a wave, building until it shook the walls. The vote was called. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. Humanity would go to war. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity across human space. Every military base activated its reserves. Every shipyard worked around the clock. Messages went out to every corner of human territory, calling pilots and soldiers and engineers back to duty. Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the fleet assemble. Ships arrived in ones and twos at first, then in groups of 10 and 20. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers, each one crewed by men and women who had chosen to answer the call. "Commander, we have a problem," her second-in-command said. Lieutenant Commander Ben was a practical man, not given to panic, but his voice was tight with concern. "Even with full mobilization, we only have 1,600 combat vessels. The Dominion outnumbers us more than 5 to 1. Lisa nodded slowly. She had done the math herself. By every measure, this was a battle they could not win. "Then we will have to make each ship count for 5, she said. Ben stared at her. "With respect, Commander, that is not a strategy." "No," Lisa agreed. "It is a statement of intent. The strategy will come later. For now, we focus on getting there in time to make a difference." Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Captains met with their officers. Officers met with their crews. Everyone understood the odds. Everyone understood what they were being asked to do. And yet the volunteers kept coming. Civilian freighters arrived, their hulls hastily fitted with weapons. Mining ships came with their crews, offering to use their heavy equipment as improvised rams. Even passenger liners appeared, their captains offering to serve as hospital ships or supply transports. Old veterans came out of retirement, putting on uniforms that no longer quite fit. Young cadets who had not yet finished training demanded early graduation so they could join the fleet. Families said goodbye to each other, not knowing if they would ever meet again. On Earth, the great orbital stations went dark as power was redirected to the military networks. Cities dimmed their lights to save energy. Factories that had been making consumer goods switched to producing ammunition and medical supplies. For the first time in generations, humanity moved as one. Not because they were ordered to, not because they were afraid, but because they remembered a debt that could never be fully repaid. Lisa watched the final count scroll across her display. 1,742 combat vessels, 300 support ships, nearly 500,000 men and women, all willing to die for a species most of them had never met. It was not enough. It would never be enough. but it was everything they had. "All ships report ready, Commander," Ben said quietly. Lisa took a deep breath and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Commander Lisa Grant. In a few hours we will enter space. We will face an enemy that outnumbers us and outguns us. Many of us will not come home." She paused, looking at the stars ahead. "But we are not going to win this war with numbers. We are going to win it with something the Dominion has never faced before: determination, creativity, and the absolute refusal to quit." Her voice hardened. "They gave us a future when we had none. Today we give that gift back. All hands prepare for jump. We have a debt to pay." The fleet moved forward as one, and the darkness of space swallowed them whole. The first thing Lisa saw when the fleet emerged from jump was fire. 3 colony worlds burned in the distance, their surfaces glowing red with destruction. Space around them was filled with debris, broken ships, shattered stations, and the frozen bodies of those who had tried to flee. "Dear God," Ben whispered beside her. Lisa forced herself to look. This was what they had come to stop. This was what the Dominion did to those who could not fight back. "How many ships do you count?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "At least 3,000 in this sector alone," her tactical officer reported. "The main Dominion fleet is closer to Prime. We are looking at their forward elements." 3,000 ships, and this was just the beginning. Lisa opened a channel to the refugee convoys that clogged the space lanes. Thousands of vessels, most of them civilian, were trying to reach there before the enemy caught them. They had no weapons. They had no defenses. They were lambs running from wolves. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of the United Earth Fleet," she said. "All refugee vessels form up behind our lines. We will provide cover for your retreat to Prime." The response was confused and frightened. Many could not believe what they were hearing. Humans? Here. Why would humans come to help them? But they followed her instructions. They had no other choice. The Dominion forward fleet noticed the new arrivals within minutes. A message came through on all channels, broadcast in the harsh language of the translator rendered it into cold, mocking words. "Unknown vessels, you have entered Dominion territory. Identify yourselves and withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed." Lisa smiled grimly. "Open a channel." She stood straight, facing the camera that would transmit her image to the enemy. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of the United Earth Fleet. We are here to defend the people. We will not withdraw." There was a pause. Then another message came, this time from a different source. The voice was deeper, filled with arrogance and contempt. "I am Warlord, Commander of the Dominion Invasion Forces. You are humans, the small ones, the insects who barely crawled out of your birth system." "That is correct," Lisa replied calmly. Laughed. It was a cruel sound, like stones grinding together. "You number less than 2,000 ships. I command 10 times that number. What possible difference do you think you can make?" Lisa leaned forward slightly. "I guess you will find out." She cut the transmission and turned to her bridge crew. "All ships battle formation. We are going in." The first engagement began 20 minutes later. The Dominion ships were massive, heavily armored dreadnoughts designed to crush enemies through sheer force. They moved in tight formations, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They expected the humans to fight the same way. They expected lines of battle, direct confrontation, a simple test of strength against strength. They did not expect Lieutenant Vance. Was 23 years old and had been flying combat missions since she was 19. She had never faced odds like this before, but she had grown up reading stories about human pilots who had done the impossible, and she intended to add her name to that list. "All right, boys and girls," she said to her squadron, "here is the plan. We are going to fly straight into the middle of their formation. We are going to make them very angry, and then we are going to lead them right into our main fleet's firing solution." That sounds like suicide, one of her wingmen observed. Only if we get caught, replied. Try not to get caught. Her destroyer, the Swift, led the charge. 11 small ships racing toward 3,000 enemies. The Dominion commanders could not believe what they were seeing. It made no tactical sense. It was reckless, foolish, insane. But it worked. The Dominion ships broke formation to chase the tiny attackers. They spread out, trying to surround the human vessels, and in doing so, they exposed their flanks to the rest of the Earth fleet. Lisa gave the order, all capital ships fire. The space between the fleets erupted in light. Human weapons were not as powerful as Dominion guns, but they were precise. They targeted weak points, engine ports, weapon mounts, sensor arrays. Ships that could have shrugged off direct hits found themselves crippled by surgical strikes. 40 Dominion vessels fell in the first hour, then 60, then 100. Watched in disbelief. This was not how war was supposed to work. The weaker side was supposed to break and run. They were supposed to beg for mercy. They were not supposed to fight like cornered animals, biting and clawing at everything within reach. They are not retreating, one of his officers observed nervously. They will, growled. Increase pressure overwhelmed them. But the humans did not retreat. When one ship was destroyed, the others closed ranks. When ammunition ran low, captains rammed their vessels into enemy hulls. When all seemed lost, someone always found a way to keep fighting. On the ground, the war was equally fierce. Marine Captain Adam Hayes led a strike team to a besieged city. The Dominion ground forces had surrounded it, cutting off all escape routes. Thousands of civilians were trapped inside, waiting to die. Adam's team dropped from orbit in armored pods, punching through the enemy lines like meteors. They hit the ground fighting, their weapons blazing as they carved a path through the Dominion soldiers. They watched in amazement as the humans moved through the streets. These strange, small creatures fought with a fury that seemed impossible for their size. They took wounds that should have killed them and kept moving. They protected civilians with their own bodies, shielding strangers from enemy fire. An elderly approached Adam during a brief pause in the fighting. Her silver skin was stained with ash, and her eyes held the weariness of someone who had seen too much death. I do not understand, she said. We have no treaty with your people, we have no alliance. Why are you here? Adam checked his rifle, making sure it was ready for the next wave of enemies. Because you were there for us, he said simply. The elder stared at him for a long moment. In her ancient eyes, something shifted. Confusion gave way to recognition, and recognition gave way to something deeper. She bowed to him, a gesture of profound respect that her people reserved for their greatest heroes. Then we will fight beside you, she said, to the end. Adam smiled beneath his helmet. That is all we ask. Above them the battle raged on. Ships burned and fell. Soldiers died and were replaced by others. The Dominion pushed forward and the humans pushed back. The galaxy watched, waiting to see who would break first. But the humans had already made their choice. They would not break, they would not retreat. They had a debt to pay, and nothing in the universe would stop them from paying it. The war had lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of endless battle, of sleepless nights, of death and fire and the bitter taste of loss. Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the casualty reports that filled her display. The destroyer Valor was gone, all hands lost. The carrier Horizon had limped back to human space with half its crew dead. 237 ships had been destroyed. Nearly 50,000 human soldiers would never see their homes again. But the Dominion had paid a higher price. For every human ship lost, 3 enemy vessels had been destroyed. The invaders had expected a quick victory, a simple crushing of a minor species. Instead, they had walked into a nightmare. Lisa allowed herself a small moment of grim satisfaction. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Commander, Ben said quietly. "We have a communication from the Galactic Council." Lisa frowned. The Council had declared neutrality at the start of this war. They had refused to help They had watched from a safe distance as millions died. "Put it through," she said. The holographic display flickered, and the image of a council ambassador appeared. He was a tall creature with pale skin and many eyes, belonging to a race that had been ancient when humans were still living in caves. "Commander Grant," he said, "the council wishes to express its concern about the current situation." "Concern," Lisa repeated flatly. "The war has gone on longer than anyone expected. The Dominion is suffering significant losses. There are fears that this conflict could destabilize the entire region." Lisa laughed. It was not a kind sound. "You watched the burn. You did nothing when they begged for help, and now you are concerned because the Dominion is losing." The ambassador shifted uncomfortably. "The Council maintains strict neutrality in such matters. We cannot interfere in the internal affairs of member states." "They were a member state," Lisa said coldly. "You let them die anyway." She cut the transmission before he could respond. Across the galaxy, other races watched the war with growing unease. The Dominion had been one of the most feared powers in known space. Their fleet was supposed to be unstoppable. Their warlords were supposed to be invincible. And yet here was humanity, a young species, barely a century into their space exploration, fighting the Dominion to a standstill, making the unstoppable stop. On a dozen worlds, subject species of the Dominion began to whisper. If the humans could resist, maybe they could too. Maybe the chains that held them were not as strong as they had believed. Warlord sensed the change in mood. He sent urgent messages to his superiors, demanding more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. But the reinforcements were slow to arrive. The Dominion's other enemies were watching, waiting for signs of weakness. "We need to end this quickly," told his officers. "One decisive blow to crush the human fleet, then we finish and restore order." He ordered his forces to concentrate around Prime. The final battle would be fought there. Winner take all. On the Defiance, Lisa received intelligence from her operations officer. Cross was a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped working. She had spent the last week analyzing every piece of information they had gathered about the Dominion command structure. "I have found something," said. "The Dominion fleet operates on a centralized command system. All major decisions flow through the flagship, the throne of. If we can destroy it, the entire fleet will fall into chaos." Lisa studied the data. The throne of is the most heavily defended ship in their fleet. It sits at the center of their formation, surrounded by 300 capital ships. "Yes," agreed. "A direct assault would be suicide." "Then we do not make a direct assault," Lisa said slowly. Her mind was racing, seeing possibilities in the darkness. "We give them something else to worry about." The plan that emerged was desperate. The entire human fleet would launch a massive attack on the Dominion perimeter, drawing their attention outward. Meanwhile, a small strike force would slip through the chaos and punch straight for the flagship. It was a one-way mission. Everyone knew it. The pilots who volunteered would not be coming back. Was the first to step forward. "No," Lisa said immediately. "You are too valuable. You have already done more than anyone could ask." Shook his head. His eyes held a quiet certainty that she found impossible to argue with. "My grandfather lived because someone was willing to give everything," he said. "That is the debt we are paying, not just to but to everyone who ever sacrificed for someone else." He smiled, and there was no fear in it. "This is what I was born for, Commander. Let me do this." Lisa looked at him for a long moment. She saw his youth, his courage, his absolute conviction. She saw a man who understood exactly what he was doing and had made peace with it. "Approved," she said finally. "Choose your team." assembled 12 pilots, the best fighters in the fleet. They gathered in the hangar bay of the Defiance, checking their ships one last time. No one spoke about what was coming. There was nothing to say. Before he climbed into his cockpit, recorded a message for his family. It was short and simple. I love you all. Tell my grandfather that I understand now. I understand why the matter. I understand why some debts can only be paid in blood. I am not afraid. He paused, looking into the camera. Remember me, and remember what we fought for. The battle began at dawn by time. The human fleet surged forward, hammering the Dominion lines with everything they had. Ships exploded on both sides. The darkness of space lit up like a storm of fire and light. In the chaos, and his squadron slipped through. They flew low, using debris fields and burning wrecks as cover. Enemy patrols spotted them, but too late. Pilots were fast, faster than anything the Dominion had seen. They twisted and dodged through a hurricane of weapons fire, losing ships one by one but never slowing down. When they reached the inner defense ring, only 4 pilots remained, then 3, then 2. Then only. The throne of loomed before him, massive and terrible. Its weapons swiveled toward his tiny fighter. There was no way through, no way out. Did not hesitate. He pushed his engines to maximum and aimed his ship directly at the flagship's bridge. For my grandfather, he whispered. For humanity, for the... His fighter struck the throne at full speed. The explosion tore through the command deck, killing Warlord and his entire senior staff in an instant. Across the Dominion fleet, chaos erupted. Without their leader, without their command structure, the enemy ships began to scatter. Some retreated. Some continued fighting without coordination. Some simply drifted, their crews paralyzed by confusion. Lisa watched from the bridge of the Defiance, tears streaming down her face. All ships, she said, her voice breaking, advance, push them back, finish this. The human fleet surged forward, and the Dominion shattered before them. Was gone, but his sacrifice had turned the tide. The battle was won. The silence that followed the battle was almost painful. For 3 weeks, the space around Prime had been filled with the thunder of weapons and the screams of dying ships. Now there was only stillness, broken occasionally by the drift of debris against the Defiance's hull. Lisa Grant stood at her observation window, watching the turn slowly beneath her. It was but alive. The Dominion's ground forces had been pushed back. The orbital bombardment had been stopped before it could reach the major cities. Millions of lives had been saved. It did not feel like victory. Too many had died for it to feel like anything but survival. Commander, Ben said softly behind her, we have an incoming vessel, diplomatic transport. They are requesting permission to dock. Lisa nodded without turning. Granted. Elder came aboard the Defiance an hour later. He moved slowly, supported by 2 younger. His silver skin had grown pale with age, and his eyes held a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He had seen his world nearly destroyed. He had watched his people die by the millions. And he had seen strangers come from across the stars to save them. Admiral Cole met him in the ship's main conference room. Lisa was there too, along with the senior officers who had survived the campaign. They stood at attention as the elder entered, a gesture of respect that seemed inadequate for what he represented. Looked around the room, studying each face. His gaze lingered on the empty chairs where fallen officers should have been sitting. You have lost so many, he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. We knew the cost going in, replied. We chose to pay it anyway. Why? Asked. The question seemed to pain him. We are strangers to you. We offered you refuge once, yes, but that was decades ago. We asked for nothing in return. Why would you sacrifice so much for a gesture that we ourselves considered small? Was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. 30 years ago, my parents were among the colonists on 22B, he said. I was not born yet. I would never have been born if not for your intervention. My entire existence is a gift that you gave us." He met the elder's eyes. "You say it was a small gesture. You gave us hope when we had none. You saved us when everyone else looked away. To us, that is not small, that is everything." Closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "We have been scholars and diplomats for 10,000 years," he said. "We have studied countless species across the galaxy. We thought we understood the patterns of civilization. We thought we knew how beings behave." He shook his head slowly. "We did not understand humans. You are unexpected." Lisa spoke for the first time. "Unexpected how?" Looked at her, and something like wonder crossed his ancient face. "Most species calculate. They weigh costs and benefits. They help others when it serves their interests and abandon them when it does not. This is the way of the galaxy. This is what we expected from you." He gestured toward the window, toward the stars beyond. "Instead, you came to fight a war you could not win, for a people you barely knew, to repay a kindness that was never meant to create obligation. You gave us blood when we only gave you words." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That is not calculation. That is something else. Something the galaxy has not seen in a very long time." The news of the human victory spread across known space like wildfire. Within days, every major power had heard the story. A young species, barely a century old in galactic terms, had fought one of the greatest military empires to a standstill. They had done it not for territory, not for resources, not for power. They had done it because they remembered a favor. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Ambassadors from 100 species filled the great chamber, their voices rising in debate and confusion. "They are dangerous," the Dominion representative declared. His empire had been humiliated and his fury was barely contained. "They attacked us without provocation. They should be sanctioned, isolated, destroyed." "They defended a neutral world from your aggression," another ambassador replied. "If anything, you should face sanctions." "That is not the point," a third voice cut in. This was an elder of one of the oldest races in the galaxy. His people had been watching younger species rise and fall for. "The point is what this tells us about humans." The chamber fell quiet. "Consider what they did," the elder continued. "They faced impossible odds. They knew they would suffer catastrophic losses. They had no hope of gain or profit. And yet they came anyway because 30 years ago someone was kind to their ancestors." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from every corner of the galaxy. "What does that mean for us? What happens when humans remember a grudge? What happens when humans seek justice? What happens when humans decide that someone has wronged them?" The silence was heavy with implication. "They are not like us," the elder said finally. "They do not forget, they do not calculate, they simply remember and they act." A murmur ran through the chamber. Fear, respect, uncertainty. "They are unpredictable," someone said. "Dangerous." The elder shook his head. "No, they are something far worse. They are honorable." On Earth, a memorial was built for those who had fallen in the war. It stood in the heart of the capital city, a towering pillar of black stone inscribed with the names of the dead. At its center, carved in letters that would last for centuries, was the name of. Beneath his name were the words he had spoken before the final mission. "Some debts can only be paid in blood." People came from across human space to visit the memorial. They brought flowers and photographs. They told stories about the ones they had lost. They wept and they remembered. In the years that followed, humanity found its place in the galaxy changed forever. Other species approached them with a new caution, a new respect. Trade agreements were offered. Alliances were proposed. The great powers that had once ignored humanity now sought their friendship. Because they had learned a simple truth, a truth that would echo through the centuries. Humans remember their friends. They honor their debts. They fight for what they believe in, even when the odds are impossible. And they never, ever forget. On Prime, they rebuilt their world. They planted gardens in the craters left by orbital bombardment. They raised monuments to the human soldiers who had died to protect them. They taught their children about the strange, fierce species that had come from across the stars to repay a kindness. Elder lived long enough to see the first human ambassador arrive on his. She was a young woman named Grace, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She carried with her a gift from Earth, a simple wooden box containing soil from the memorial garden. "We will never forget what you did for us," Grace said, "and we will always be here when you need us." Took the box with trembling hands. For a moment, he was silent, overwhelmed by emotions that his ancient heart could barely contain. "We saved you once," he said finally. "We thought it was nothing. We thought you would forget." He looked at the young human, and for the first time in decades, he smiled. "We were wrong, and we are glad." Above them, the stars shone bright and cold. Somewhere out there, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of empires and conflicts, of rise and fall, of endless struggle for power. But something had changed. Something new had entered the equation. Humanity had announced itself to the universe, not with weapons or threats, but with a simple, powerful truth. "We pay our debts." And the galaxy trembled.